The wind howled that night like a wolf prowling the edges of a lonely cabin in the woods. Snow fell so heavily it seemed as if the entire sky had collapsed. Inside the small farmhouse at the edge of Montana, Daniel Carter stoked the fire with one hand while the other rested on his worn-out knee, the old war injury that still ached every time a storm blew in. He wasn't just fighting the cold, he was fighting the loneliness that came with being a single father. His little daughter, Emily, sat curled up on the couch with her blanket, clutching the stuffed bear her late mother had given her before she passed. Life had been hard on them, and Daniel carried the weight of being both mother and father. It was then, just as the fire cracked, that the rumble began. At first, Daniel thought it was thunder, but thunder didn't come in rhythm. One after another, low growls of engines broke the silence of the blizzard. His heart skipped. Motorcycles. The kind of sound that made any small-town man check the locks twice. Through the frosted window, headlights glowed like predators in the storm. 15 figures pulled into his long dirt driveway, their bikes sputtering against the snow, leather jackets iced over, patches gleaming even under the whiteout. Hell's Angels. Daniel's instincts as a Marine veteran surged. He reached for the old shotgun mounted over the doorframe. But then he saw them more clearly, half frozen, shivering, one man coughing violently as another tried to steady him. They weren't looking for trouble. They were looking for shelter. Emily peeked around the corner, her little voice trembling. "Daddy, who are they?" Daniel clenched his jaw. He had every reason to say no. His wife had died in an accident caused by a reckless biker years ago, the sight of patched jackets burned like salt in an open wound. But he looked at Emily, at her innocent blue eyes, and remembered what his commanding officer used to tell him in Iraq. A man's character shows in the moments when he has every reason to shut his door, but chooses to open it. So Daniel took a deep breath, opened the door wide, and shouted over the storm, "You boys are gonna freeze to death out there. Get inside." The bikers hesitated, exchanging looks. These men were used to slammed doors and suspicious stares. But one of them, a broad-shouldered man with a beard streaked white, stepped forward and nodded. "Name's Jack. We won't cause no trouble, sir. Just need a roof till this hell passes." And just like that, 15 leather-clad outlaws filed into Daniel's living room. The night stretched long. The farmhouse was small, barely enough space for Daniel and Emily, but somehow the Angels squeezed in, sitting on the floor, near the fire, steam rising as their jackets dried. Daniel served them what little he had. Canned soup, stale bread, and coffee strong enough to cut through the cold. Emily, nervous at first, found herself giggling when one biker named Tommy used his tattooed arms to turn her stuffed bear into a talking puppet. Another, Snake, carefully fixed the broken hinge on the kitchen cabinet, whistling as he worked. It startled Daniel. He had expected arrogance, maybe violence, but instead he saw tired men, road-weary, bound by Brotherhood, softened by the warmth of a home they hadn't felt in years. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the ache of mistrust. After Emily went to bed, he sat across from Jack by the fire. "Why should I trust you?" Daniel asked bluntly. Jack took a long breath, staring at the flames. "You don't have to. Most folks don't. But we're just men trying to ride through this life like everyone else. You gave us shelter tonight. That means more than you know." Something cracked in Daniel's chest. Maybe it was the memory of nights in Fallujah, when strangers offered him bread in war-torn streets. Maybe it was the simple truth that kindness has a way of circling back. By dawn, the storm had passed. The Angels thanked him, clapped his shoulder, and promised they'd remember what he did. Daniel didn't think much of it. He'd probably never see them again. But the next morning, when Daniel stepped outside with his cup of coffee, his jaw nearly dropped. His long driveway, once buried in snow, now thundered with the roar of over 100 motorcycles. 102, to be exact, stretching down the road like an iron army. Every bike gleamed in the rising sun, chrome sparkling against the melting frost. Jack stood at the front, arms crossed, smiling. "You opened your door to us, brother," he said. "Now we open ours to you. Whatever you need, this family's got your back." Daniel felt his throat tighten. For the first time since his wife's death, he didn't feel alone. What followed wasn't just a friendship. It was a transformation. The Angels helped Daniel repair his rundown farmhouse, patching the roof, rebuilding the porch, even fixing his old truck. On weekends, they taught Emily how to ride her bicycle, cheering louder than any Little League crowd when she wobbled down the lane. But not everything was easy. The town didn't approve. Neighbors whispered that Daniel was harboring criminals, that he was putting Emily in danger. At the school, other parents pulled their kids away from Emily, afraid of her new friends. Daniel faced the hardest challenge of all, standing firm in the face of judgment. One night at a town hall meeting, when folks demanded he cut ties with the Angels, Daniel stood tall and spoke from his heart. I fought for this country alongside men I didn't always understand. But when bullets flew, those men saved my life. These bikers, they're no different. They came here in a storm, and I opened my door. They repaid me with loyalty, friendship, and respect. If that makes me guilty, then so be it. But don't you dare judge a man by the patch on his back before you know his heart. His words silenced the room. Over time, the town saw the truth. When a local church needed repairs, the Angels showed up, hammers in hand. When a kid went missing in the woods, it was the roar of their bikes that led the search party. Slowly, fear turned into gratitude. Years later, Emily would tell people that the day those 102 bikes lined up at their door was the day her family grew 100 brothers. Daniel found healing in unexpected places, learning that sometimes the people you fear most are the ones sent to remind you of the power of compassion. And the message, etched into every mile of road those Angels rode, was simple. Kindness is never wasted. Open doors can change lives, sometimes even your own. The rumble of those 102 bikes lingered in Daniel's ears for days. He couldn't forget the sight of chrome shining against the sun, the echo of engines rolling like thunder across the valley. For Emily, it had been magic. She had stood barefoot on the porch, clapping as every biker waved to her like she was a princess. But for the townsfolk, the image carried a darker meaning. By the second week, whispers spread across the little Montana town. At the diner, where Daniel sometimes took Emily for pancakes, conversation stopped the moment he walked in. A waitress he'd known since high school avoided his eyes. A man at the counter muttered loud enough for him to hear. Shame, bringing outlaws round here with kids in the house. Daniel swallowed hard, fighting the old anger that had followed him home from the war. He kept his head down, paid his bill, and left. But Emily noticed. "Daddy, why don't they like us anymore?" she asked as they got into the truck. Her words pierced deeper than bullets. How could he explain prejudice to a 7-year-old? He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Sometimes, sweetheart," he said softly, "people don't understand what they're afraid of. But one day, they'll see." The following Saturday, Jack and 3 of the Angels returned to check on Daniel. They brought tools and groceries, insisting on fixing the fence that winter storms had knocked down. Emily bounced around excitedly, handing them nails and hammers like a little helper. But halfway through, the sheriff's truck pulled into the driveway. Sheriff Hawkins stepped out, his broad hat dusted with snow, his eyes hard as flint. He walked past Daniel straight toward Jack. "I don't want to see you boys here again," Hawkins warned. "This town's had its piece without your kind." Jack didn't flinch. He simply leaned on the fence post and replied, "We ain't looking for trouble, Sheriff. Just helping our friend." Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Sheriff, these men have done more for me and my daughter in 2 weeks than most neighbors have in years. If there's a problem, you take it up with me." The sheriff's gaze softened, just a flicker, but he tipped his hat and left with a final warning. "Don't regret it, Carter." The silence after the truck left was heavy. Jack spat in the snow and shook his head. "Respect is earned slow, brother. But don't you worry, we ain't going nowhere." That night, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling. Doubts gnawed at him. Was he putting Emily in danger? Was he risking her future just to hold on to this newfound brotherhood? He remembered the promise he had made at his wife's graveside, that he would protect Emily no matter the cost. And now, here he was, letting outlaws fix his fence. But then he heard it, Emily's laughter echoing from her bedroom. She was talking to Tommy, who had stayed late and was showing her how to fold paper airplanes. For the first time since her mother's death, Emily's laughter was free, without weight, without fear. And Daniel knew in his heart, this was worth it. The real test came a month later. A fire broke out at the Miller barn, on the edge of town. Flames rose so high they painted the night sky red. By the time the fire trucks arrived, word spread that the Miller family's horses were trapped inside. Panic consumed the crowd gathered around. No one dared to run into the inferno. But then came the roar. Dozens of motorcycles tore down the road, engines screaming. The Angels. Without a word, they leapt off their bikes and charged into the fire, faces wrapped in bandanas, jackets soaked in water. One by one, they led terrified horses out of the smoke, coughing, burned, but relentless. Daniel, pulling with them, saw Jack stumble with a scorched beam across his shoulder. He rushed to help, and together they dragged the last horse to safety. The crowd watched in stunned silence. When it was over, when the fire finally died and the horses stood trembling but alive, the townsfolk could no longer deny what their eyes had witnessed. These outlaws had saved a family's livelihood. The next morning, the diner was different. People nodded at Daniel, some even smiled. One old man clapped him on the shoulder. "Guess those friends of yours ain't as bad as folks thought." Daniel simply smiled back, but deep inside, he knew the road ahead was still long. Trust wasn't built in a single night. But step by step, the wall was beginning to crack. Dash dash dash. And through it all, Emily flourished. She began to draw pictures of motorcycles with angel wings, taping them to the fridge. She told her teacher that her uncles wore leather jackets and could fix anything. To her, there was no judgment, no fear, only family. For Daniel, it was both a blessing and a burden. Because he knew that someday, the storm wouldn't just be made of snow. Someday, the angel's past would catch up to them, and when it did, his family would be in the middle of it. But for now, he chose to believe in loyalty, in kindness repaid, in the strange brotherhood that had turned his lonely farmhouse into a place alive with laughter. And that belief would be tested sooner than he imagined.